Welcome to the latest in our series of alumni talks hosted by the Architectural Association in London. This series features AA school alumni who graduated during the 2008 recession, and today we once again face unprecedented challenges in the form of a global pandemic. We've invited the alumni to discuss how they were able to both navigate and address these challenges in architectural practice and their careers. My name is Aelene, and I'll be hosting the event today. I'm a graduate of the AA Emergent Technologies and Design program, which I completed in January of this year. And today we are very pleased to welcome Aelene Thorne and Patrick Usborne, who together founded Perpendicular Architecture in 2019 after meeting at the AA as students. Their London-based practice has been earning recognition for its regenerative and community-led design approach, which I will expect they will tell us more about during their presentation. Before we begin, if I may please ask that the members of the audience turn on their cameras so that Aelene and Patrick can see with whom they're speaking to. I know we don't like being on camera, but it just makes the event a bit more social. Let's hand it over to Perpendicular. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adelina. Very nice to see you all virtually. And thank you for asking us to talk. As you've mentioned, we're only really a year old, so we're navigating our journey in these unprecedented times just as much as you guys, and we're hopefully building in resilience. We do have behind us a decade of experience in other practices, and we'll touch on that and how we hope it might help us as we go forward. We met at the AA in 2007, and we assume most of you might be joining us from there today, and a big welcome to you, and indeed those who are not. We had different routes and quite varied routes before we arrived at the AA. Some similarities. We were both mature students. Patrick had started studying in the sciences. I studied engineering. I didn't last long in engineering. Patrick studied physics. And also some healthy differences. I'd been at Edinburgh, hand drawing away for all of my undergraduate, and I had no software skills before I came to the AA. And Patrick was at the AA from foundation year, and I had no hand drawing skills whatsoever. We have different paths and complementary, we'd like to think. We'd be here for quite a long time if we'd discussed each of our individual decisions and experience over 10 years. So we've chosen a structure which we hope will help, where we highlight 10 pivotal moments or pivotal tips and about how we think you can build a resilient practice. So we're going to talk through a bit of our work experience before these tips, and then we'll finish on the work we're doing currently.
So I think what's really important, I guess, is stitching together where we left the AA. So Aelene left here just a year ahead of me, but both pretty much 2009, 2010 to where we are now, and leading Perpendicular Architecture, along with Larry and James too, who might be joining in at the event as well. So what we want to start with was what we've done since in the last 10 years, and how that's formed the practice which we are starting now, which I think fundamentally is going to be very different from if we started the practice straight after the AA, and we'll explain why. So for me, I had a very influential tutor at the AA called Chris Lee, who has now since left. He went off to teach at Harvard. And Chris was also a student at the Architectural Association. And at that time, as is a little bit now still, but less so, the emphasis was very much on parametric design and how we use computers as a tool to create quite complex geometries. And I remember in my last years, it's almost the more complex geometry you can produce, the further advanced your design is seen. And that is absolutely fantastic at the time. And I think there were some really good skills. And one of those skills was then actually transferring that to Serie Architects. And this is the BMW Pavilion for the 2012 Olympics, which was built quite close, as you can see, to the main stadium. And how we translated those skills of the complex geometries was really fundamental in making sure that Serie Architects as a practice was really doing some exciting work. And also in terms of drawing, the ability to draw and illustrating your ideas was also a key part of that as well. So it was amazing within a space of a couple of years, going from actually designing some really complex stuff as a student to actually getting something built where people could enjoy it. And that was really inspiring. And also it led opportunities to go abroad. We're very much English students and we've been in the UK for a long time, and working at Serie Architects was suddenly an open to the world and understanding what the world is wanting. And this was a competition which we won as a practice in Singapore, where I had the opportunity to go out to Singapore and with the physical model that we made in the UK and present it to the client as part of the competition. And it was just really an incredible highlight of my time at Serie Architects. But that very quickly changed to coming back to dRMM Architects, which I worked at before. And dRMM Architects, they are the complete polar opposite in many ways. And I felt that was a really amazing balance to have. And I think when you are working for others, it's about trying to recognize the skills that you might want to gain and not be afraid of grabbing those skills and working for a practice which can fulfill those skills. And dRMM was very much about the other end of the spectrum, about the detailing and about materials and using in particular regenerative natural materials. So this was Sliding House, which just was completed when I joined in 2013. But also I helped with the Timber Stadium as well, and using some of the complex geometries from being a student at the AA to come up with a script to calculate the geometry of the outer ring of the stadium. Unfortunately, we came second in the competition, so it was never built this for the 2012 Olympics, but it was an amazing process to be part of. And in similar way as well, trying to create really complex geometry. So this was had on the right here, had many iterations from a cycle hub to a swimming pool up in Scunthorpe. But it was this engineered timber roof, which was able to twist and bend. So playing with materials, but using computer-aided scripting at the same time and bringing these together. So coming from the virtual world to the reality of how do we get these complex geometries built, as a real eye-opener.
Yeah, so I then left my undergraduate at Edinburgh, and the only practice I knew of really from before I went to Edinburgh was Field & Clegg Bradley. They happened to have their Bath office in the small village where I grew up. And I dropped my CV off through the post box and then hopped on the train to London, and in the same carriage as Bill Gething, who was one of the directors there at the time. And I had to sit all at the other end of the carriage, sort of nervously, thinking, should I approach him and actually tell him I've just dropped my CV off and applied for a job there? And in the end, I did. And I've never regretted that. That was definitely a confidence boosting moment. So when I eventually got to Field & Clegg, I stayed there for 2 years because I needed to learn some software. And I designed and worked on the tender package for St Mary Magdalene Academy, which is what you see in this picture. Following my 2 years at the AA, I got a tip off from Patrick that the dRMM were looking for people to work there. And I also applied to dRMM. However, Patrick was not there at the time. And I ended up working for about 3 to 4 years in their schools team. For some of that time I spent working with the directors on practice management and dropped project work, but that I will get to later. But this is a St Albans Academy in Birmingham, which I was project architect on for a while. And I did a lot of work with the directors over the final year that I was there on bids and consultation work, and bid on the Hastings Pier project, which hasn't been the success that we all would have loved to see, but was a fantastic experience to be involved in. And you see Hastings Pier here too. following dRMM, I looked, and having had some practice management experience, I ended up doing some consultancy work for small practices on how to best set up their offices. And then I moved away from London for a bit. When I returned, I came and worked at Mae for a couple of years. And this is Grenadier House that you see in Westminster that's recently been completed. It's a retirement home, high-end, effectively luxury flats, which don't appear to be retirement home flats, but which you can retire in. And this was actually a really lovely project to work on with incredible detailing. So Patrick's introducing our top 10.
So top 10, here we go. You ready? So this is what we've tried to come up with just to help out. So whether you've got an idea or leaving the AA, setting up a practice straight away, which I'm sure many of you might do, or maybe you're thinking about joining another practice, and yes, difficult times to do that. And I think we hope these top 10 might help you either present yourself in a way where you are just so attractive to a practice they can't say no. Or if you want to set up your new practice, is clients can't say no to employing you to do whatever skills you might have. So here we go, top 10. Number 10.
Number 10. So I suppose the other side of what Patrick is saying is also just to bide your time if you can't find what you want now, and keep the faith. And that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit. It's easy to get lost in projects, particularly on the next slide. Patrick will show you that I took on a rather large task when I got to the AA, and I looked at Musmeki's Bacento Bridge in Italy, and it's full of double curvature, and I decided that I might quite like to make a building full of these principles with not much software skills and definitely no double curvature skills. So this became a kind of 2-year project where I really got into the detail of things, and often I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. I tried to take what I could from it, and my learning and my experience from it is that this actually really helped me later on. I thought at the time it wasn't going to, but then when I got to dRMM, I was responsible for all the grid shell design of a deaf academy in Exeter, and the two couldn't have worked better together. So keep the faith, don't lose hope, and look for threads where you can between what you're interested in at the AA or in your studies, and how you might be able to apply that to real life design.
Number 9, grab every opportunity that you possibly can and really get stuck in. I think there's a real issue potentially with being trapped in the AA bubble. It's very kind of an enclosed world in many ways, even though it's a melting pot of ideas and amazing opportunities. But it's still very easy to grab your experience from particularly your last unit that you might have been part of, and feel as though you can do whatever you might want to do with that knowledge, with that mindset, when actually what's best is to get out in the world and just get mucked in. I think we've been influenced in particular by one of our team, Larry. So Larry is a graduate of the RCA rather than the AA. James is a graduate of the AA. And he is a member of a collective called the Paul Collective, which I highly recommend you have a look at on their website. It's very much voluntary. This is a large-scale painting that they got the local community to do. And this is about a couple of weeks ago now, on a blank wall. And yes, it's not exactly your double curvatures or maybe something you'll be doing at the AA, but it's about becoming actually involved and helping others. And it's through helping others that you begin to have conversations, and those conversations might trigger an idea, and that idea might trigger something else, which actually might lead to being a core part of a new practice or a new passion that you might have. So mucking in, speaking with people and actually getting something done, I think is really good balance to all of the more academic study work that you might be doing in the AA at the moment.
And number 8, I hope that you're all doing this anyway, but it's worth pointing out that in 2009, I didn't have a Facebook account. I didn't have an Instagram account, no Twitter account, no social network whatsoever. So I just feel like the absence of that means that today it's really important to highlight that we need to embrace activism and find somewhere to shout loudly about what we believe. And in particular, through my experience, the next slide, please. There are a few organisations which, for the moment, I'm aligning myself with and finding really useful to our practice as a whole. And my daughter was born with Down syndrome about 4 years ago. And it's organisations like Design Can that really give me hope that we are going to live in a more inclusive world, both architecturally, but all around the world. And it's architects that can really solve problems like that. And along with Women in Architecture, advocating for women, and Part W, changing the status quo and making sure that that there are enough Black and ethnic minority women throughout all the prize giving that we see every day. These organisations are invaluable to me at the moment. So find yours and support them.
Number 7, engage beyond architecture. So I was really, and this is kind of going beyond looking at your local community as well. So whether where you live or where you're, even where the AA is, or if you're intending to stay in the UK or go back home after your studies, it's very much about understanding who your local networks are. So whether that's your local school or and who those governors are, or local charities. So for example, I live in Cambridge. I'm speaking from Cambridge at the moment after moving here quite recently. And, there's a whole network here, which I'm slowly getting to grips with and tapping into. And I think that's a really good compliment as well to the skills you have. And I was really amazed when I was at dRMM Architects a couple of years ago, before leaving, a couple of students in particular, which were Kat Scott and Annalisa McSweeney, who co-founded jointly ACAN. And you might have heard about ACAN, Architects Climate Action Network. And it's an incredible organization. So they're still working at dRMM. That's where they get their income from. But they've working with others and really building up this incredible action network and galvanizing a lot of support. And they're able to get to a size now where they're really being listened to. They've got a really strong platform and they've really bonded really well as a group. So I would definitely encourage looking beyond where you might be working or the practice and looking at actually how you can help as well.
This point, face the uncomfortable, could be applied in a multitude of ways to my career, my experience, and obviously most recently also now with Black Lives Matter. In light of that, it's really critical that we look at our privileged profession, our white privilege, and we unlearn and try and change what we've been taught before. But particularly, I also want to highlight that when doing schools education, consultation was just hugely important to us, and really listening and ensuring that the views of the children and the staff and the various different stakeholders were all considered and well documented and brought to the design as much as possible. There are many other examples I can give about facing the uncomfortable, particularly also bids. When applying for bids for dRMM, I noticed a far higher success rate if you think about what your client's worry is, if you think about what you've missed out in the design and you try and explain how you could have a solution to that, or you don't avoid the white elephant, basically, face up to it. And this could be applied in so many situations, and it normally guarantees more success than avoiding it.
So number 5, I'm going to do number 5 and number 4, one after the other quite quickly. So number 5, seek for problems. So hunt them out. As architects or upcoming architects, architects have got this amazing ability to solve problems. And I think that skill is undervalued in the industry. When you get out there in the world of work, the skills architects have are incredible. And it's very easy for employers to oversee those skills and not fully appreciate and respect those. But architects really do have an amazing ability to solve problems. So as Perpendicular, what we want to do from the outset was to look at how we can collaborate with others. We really feel strongly about the idea of collaborating. So we teamed up with some other consultants. There was an engineer who deals with life cycle analysis and a passive house consultant. And together we created a Positive Collective. So this website is live. You can go onto it. It's positivecollective.co.uk. And on the website, it highlights what we're doing quite clearly. And we found there's a massive problem in how do we reach carbon zero by 2050? And what skills can we have as an architect to help deliver that? And we've come up with a solution collaborating with others to actually deal with that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of the presentation, about this project in particular. So I'll leave it there for now. Number 4, adding a string to your bow. And I think this is really important and I'm sure you've already identified at the AA what you're particularly good at or passionate about, really what you're passionate about and harnessing that, because if you're going out there and wanting to be employed, employers always will love to see some sort of passion that you've got, some skill that you've got that you're really wanting to move forward with. And more often or not, they will see that as really added value over the tools that you might have learned or the other skills is what your passions are. So for me, my passion is timber. My father was a furniture maker. This is kind of an image of his workshop and in London. And I love using timber in design and also talking about timber. So I've been on stage through dRMM and also Perpendicular a number of times now, really pushing the benefits of using timber in construction. And it's only using timber where we can actually get to carbon zero by 2050. So, and I could go on for hours about this topic, but having a passion.
That leads quite nicely into number 3, which is my advice, which I could have called be unreasonable or be annoying at work or something, but actually is called don't stick to your job role. And that doesn't mean don't do your job role, do your job, but also be curious about everything that isn't your job, because after all, an architectural practice is a business. And it could be any type of business, but it's still a business. It's still got to do what other businesses do. And definitely from my 1.5 years at dRMM, where I work directly with the directors to improve or work on all aspects of the business, I became very familiar with a quality management system, and therein lay an opportunity for me to consult, which I did, smaller practices on what they needed to do and how they needed to set up to have a good quality management system. And for those of you that don't know about quality management systems, effectively, you just want to produce the best work you can and make your clients as happy as possible. And a management system is a way of ensuring that you do. And it really does help you self-analyze where your shortfalls may be and where your opportunities may be. So become familiar with that. At the time, also, my husband was working for business in the community, and business has always been very far ahead in terms of other sectors compared to the architectural sector when it comes to responsible business. And that's my next point, so slide number 2 is understand value and take social responsibility seriously. And in the last few years, it's been wonderful to see that many businesses are being far more socially responsible, partly because they have to, partly because of competition, but also because the Social Value Act was passed. And there really is a benefit to businesses, and as people realise this, that engaging across the social sector, the third sector, working with the private sector and the public sector to deliver their projects, it does bring in loads of opportunities. And understanding value, I think, has been a preoccupation of mine throughout the last 10 years, but it's really only now that the toolkits are available for people to manage their practices or to look at how they can deliver value, understand the value of themselves, understand the values that their projects bring to their clients, and actually measure it and sell it to people in a really good way for business.
And the number one to finish our top 10 is look to the future and start designing. And that's exactly what we've done at Perpendicular as well. So it's probably got about 5 minutes left from my count. I don't know if that's about right. Just to run through what we've been looking into in the future at Perpendicular and going back to that design. So I'm just going to quickly whiz through these designs before we conclude. So creating a new practice is so exciting. Both Aelene and I, we spend many moments in coffee shops over the last couple of years trying to go back and forth and figure out, what message what do we want to do? What do we want to offer? What do we want to give? And very much defined by the experience that we've had in practice, but also at the AA. So we're now a team of 4. Larry and James have joined us, which is brilliant because they come with amazing skills. They are graduated last year now from the RCA and the AA. So you might recognize James. And we are focusing on these kind of 3 main elements. So it's creating really inspirational, enjoyable spaces in particular, but really focusing on people and what communities need. And this is really important as architects, is how we can bring design to ensure that we are giving back to the local people who are going to be living and working and visiting. Also, offsite is a big speciality of ours as well, and how we can put buildings together in a jigsaw kind of way. And then also going back to the sustainability aspect as well, and focusing on how we can achieve carbon zero way before 2050. So we've collaborated with this with others. Just waiting for that GIF to go. It's going now. To create a design for the future, and this is a government-funded scheme. We're being paid for by the government to come up with a design which isn't too futuristic. It's not about 2050 or 2100. It's about what could a house be in 10 years' time. So it's quite close. So we've got we're not being too futuristic about it. We're being actually very grounded. What materials can come into designing a house, which are regenerative? What are the systems? What are the spaces? How can we deal with the offsite elements of it? So we've spent the last 4 or 5 months coming up with a design, and we've just actually submitted that to the government quite recently. And that goes all the way to the inside. And ultimately, it's about creating enjoyable, incredible spaces, which are very tactile. It's about materiality. It's about volume, space, and light. But also, it's about how we can imagine how people will live in 10 years' time. What are the technologies which are going to be coming up in 10 years to make life easier and more manageable? And how can we integrate those technologies into our design? Light space is particularly important. There's another image here. So what's really key too is not only bringing communities together and enabling communities to socialize as much as possible, but also it's about restoring society and also restoring nature. So it's thinking about what are the ingredients which are coming in to make our communities, not just the buildings, but the communities themselves. And thinking about, in terms of the buildings, how are they made, how are they used, how could they be reused over time once they come to the end of their life in 50, 60 years' time? What is the second life for those materials in terms of the manufacturing? And then collectively, it's about restoring nature, about bringing back net biodiversity gain and reducing our carbon to below zero. And this is the image of our society, of our collective. And again, the brief from the government was very specific about wanting houses. This is not a high density development in the city centres. This is about housing low density out of town and how we can design that for a bit of a better world. And then this is an image which we've created. So thank you very much. That's a very quick summary of what we're doing at Perpendicular at the moment. We are also doing a whole lot of other projects from consultancy to design, but I think that project represents kind of the core values of who we are. I don't know if you want to add any more to that, Aelene, as well.
Thank you very much. That's all I was going to say. I think I had a sort of postscript on the next slide, which I'm almost embarrassed to share. Don't forget you've come a long way. And I just wanted to show you my possibly worst ever section from when I went to Fiji, and I took one of those opportunities to work with the only architect out there. And this was my first section that I did for a practice. And I'd like you to note the size of the wine cellar compared to the fine dining. Anyway, with that, everyone's come a long way. Keep the faith.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. I suppose let's start with some questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, please raise your blue Zoom hand, or you can also type your question into the chat. I will be monitoring that. So I don't know if we have anybody. I don't see.
Adelina, if you want, I can start.
Yes, you had a question, didn't you?
Yeah, I had a question.
Go ahead.
You touched upon some of this question during your presentation, but I was wondering the idea, the ambition setting up your practice, when did it actually originate? Was that at the back of your mind already during your AA studies, or something that it grew or even originated during your years in practice?
Yeah, good question. I think it consolidated actually when we did our part 3 at the Bartlett. So we decided to, I can't remember if it was coincidence or not, when we joined the Bartlett to do our part 3 in 2011 and 12.
I think it was coincidence actually that we happened to be enrolled at the same time.
I think we just both chose quite wisely for that one. But yeah, I remember at the time there was a one unit or one element of the teaching, which was about creating your own practice and putting a pitch to the Royal Academy for a fictitious extension. And they asked everybody to form a fictitious practice. And I think we both wanted to and pretty much volunteered to be the directors of that fictitious practice. And the others chose other roles such as the architect or whatever it might have been. And I think that was probably the beginning of the conversation. And we've been continuously having the conversation since then until actually setting up. But yeah, I don't know if that's fits in, Aelene, with what you're...
Yeah, that's totally what I remember. I remember at the time thinking, cool, how's this going to work with two of us both at the helm? But actually it worked surprisingly well, and I think that sealed the deal.
Thank you. And following up from that question, why did you think that was the right time? Why not 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 6 years ago? Was it more kind of practical reason or personal reason?
Actually, I had quite strong views about this. Patrick probably would have set up a year after we started discussing, for various reasons. First of all, I really believed in having a lot of experience in the country that you were going to base yourself when setting up an architectural practice. And Patrick had been working for Serie Architects, but not necessarily working in the UK. And I had UK experience, but wanted experience outside of just one practice. So I felt strongly that a lot of experience behind us was a good thing. And so that's largely why we delayed it. But also in that time, both of us have families. We've both got 2 young children. And I then started to delay when we would start up. Probably I would have delayed it by a whole nother year. But that wasn't possible because Patrick got some work in rather quickly, rather earlier than I expected. And that's been great because I needed that really.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question for us as well, because it's really, I think from the going to the Bartlett in 2011, 2012 for the post, the part 3, kind of really after that being energized and wanting to set up a practice, but waiting for that moment to have the, as Aelene said, the knowledge and the confidence to go for it, but also the network. And I remember really clearly years ago, Alison Brooke wrote an article where she was asked the same question and about setting up her own practice and when to do it. And I remember what she said was actually, if you treat, if you're working in a practice in the way in which you would run a practice, then you've set yourself up in the right way to go for it. And so I left dRMM Architects a year ago as an associate, and I was running a couple of projects. I had a team which oscillated from being, I think the biggest size was 12 people I was looking after at dRMM, all the way down to 2 or 3. But I was still running jobs and running a team. And I think that felt as though a much more natural progression into starting a practice than something much earlier where you don't have that experience and network in place.
Thank you. Just responded to the next question, which was about, would you advise a student to gain a sort of extensive experience in practice rather than setting up their own studio straight away after graduated? But I think I know what your advice would be. My next question is, it's not easy.
I think actually it could, if you got a real passion, I wouldn't, because I know you've had a couple of speakers on already who have set up straight away after graduating, and I absolutely not against that at all. I think it's, if you got that passion to go for it, then absolutely you need to go for it. And I think it just really depends on what you want to do in your practice as well. And I just felt that for me, and I think for us and Aelene as well, it was just important to get some experience first before, and having a network so you can tap into. You know, we had clients from day one, you know, who were paying us bills, you know, we could live off. So yeah, I think it depends on what you want to do.
I was also going to say, I think it's a question of scale. We made quite a conscious decision throughout the 10 years that we were talking that we wanted to come in at a larger scale if we could, you know, look at work over a certain amount of pounds, £1 million. And that was a decision to go in at a sort of mid-level design practice size and project size. And I think, you know, totally go for it, but really depending on scale, for us, it wouldn't have made a huge amount of sense not to have business experience and not to have a bigger network.
Thank you. My next question is, when someone think or plan to set up a new practice, regardless whether it's straight after graduating or after 10, 15 years of working in practice, how are you going to sort of differentiate yourself? Because there are thousands, 100,000 practices out there. What would be your advice in order basically to first of all attract clients and in a way become a household name or become sort of brand, if you wish?
Well, I mean, wouldn't we all like to have a really easy answer to that? For me, I think that our conversations have, both in Patrick and my case, have been completely driven by our interests first. And if we can't align our practice with our interests, then it begs the question, whether we should even continue with our practice. So I think the two have to merge over time. And if you can do that and you can believe and back yourself in your ideas and your interests, then you have a much better chance of making your practice stand out, making it appealing to others. That's my opinion. Anyway.
Yeah, I think it's particularly difficult now, isn't it? I mean, with the fact that we're in a pandemic, albeit, you know, they found a vaccine, which is fantastic. So let's hope that's going to come through quickly. But it is very difficult. And, you know, the unemployment rate, we've just heard yesterday, is at the historic high or pretty high anyway. So how do you graduate in a moment? And that's exactly what we did 10 years ago, 2009, 2010. And I think back then there was very much a reliance on our AA network. So whether dRMM or going with Serie Architects. And I think it's identifying what you're passionate about and what your skills are whilst at the AA, and then using your AA network as best as you possibly can to be the first stepping stone. So I think it's about not having necessary ideas that suddenly you're going to be able to land this amazing job. You might be able to, not saying that you won't, But I think it's really harnessing what you've already got at the AA and making really best use of it, your own talent, your own skills, and your own network, and just really slowly build that up and see what happens and explore.
Cool, thank you. My last question actually came up while you were presenting the last project. It's a very cheeky question. How did you get that sort of government-funded project? How did you win it?
Yeah, we so that was actually taking advantage of the lockdown in spring. So we entered a competition and were shortlisted for it. Yeah, so it was a competition based, but it was an open international competition, and it was through collaborating with others where we could really add that value, and through that it's gone on from there. So yeah, we're kind of fortunate in a way. I think at the time we were hesitant whether to enter an open international competition where the chances of going through is just so remote, but we did, and we got there and we did it. So yeah, and it's quite exciting where that's going to take us. Let's see.
Thank you very much. That's all from me for the moment.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. One of the things that I noticed coming out of school and talking to both diploma students and postgraduate students is that AA students in general are very open to innovation, and we really collectively feel we want to sort of bring something to the table, the skills that we know to practice wherever we may end up. And sometimes there's a bit of resistance to that sort of mindset, whether we're bringing new skills or new ideas. How do we navigate this? How do we convince people that we're not trying to, upset the, current status quo, or, we're not upstarts. We're just trying to, push forward on some new ideas that are potentially beneficial?
It's a really good question. I think that mindset and innovation is critical and becoming more critical for our business practices. I think there are two ways. One is to look yourself, if you're feeling that you have these great ideas, to find the way to make them realized yourself. So if there's a grant that supports research and development within your practice, but your practice hasn't had the time to go and find that grant, doesn't quite know how to pay you for that extra innovation that you maybe want to spend time on, then there are ways of making that a research project, and there are tax credits that companies can have for R&D. So I think perhaps what you're coming up against often is just people who are short of time, and people who don't have time or maybe money to really help out in that situation. And I think if you present them with the way to do that too, you may find more success.
I think it's in addition to that is being really proud of what you've been taught and what you're discovering and learning, because actually once you're in practice, or at least for the employer of a practice, if you're wanting to join another company, is that they don't always have the opportunity or the time or the facilities to be able to understand what the current trends are in terms of innovation. And I think the vast majority, if not all, companies out there rely on the knowledge and skills that you guys as recent graduates would bring. So I think also it's actually being quite proud and quite firm, in the fact that you've come up with this innovative way of doing a certain project or a drawing or whatever it might be, and presenting that in a really proud way to an employer, and actually allowing the employer to have the opportunity to kind of think about, oh, okay, yeah, that could really work with X, Y, and Z that they're thinking about in the practice. as well. So, and I think also it kind of ties in with if you want to set up your own practice, and one of our top 10 is, identifying what the problem is. So if you can find what a problem is, and then you've got a way to solve it because you've innovated at the AA, then it's about collaborating and hunting, finding how to get funding for it, as Aelene said, or it's teaming up with others and coming together and say, okay, let's produce something here. It might be a bit of software or a solution, or it might not need to be design of a building. It could be a solution to a problem which currently exists at the moment. So,
a very, very quick way of doing it would be to put forward yourself for a CPD and use that opportunity to present where you think it could go to. And that's definitely what I found myself doing on at least 3 occasions when I needed an outlet for some ideas.
That's very good advice. And I wanted to ask you about your practice. How do you sort of guide your clients, the community, the authorities, when you have something that maybe hasn't been done before in a certain area? For example, timber building is relatively new to London. How do you navigate this with authorities or with whoever, something that hasn't had a sort of standard method applied to it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's very complex. Especially my experience at dRMM and also with us at Perpendicular. It's very difficult to navigate between all of the variables and the issues which go against. So I think certainly in the construction industry, if not society on the whole, we've very much are in a kind of it's not kind of a groove, but we function in an environment which has self-regulated itself over time and has grown accustomed to the way in which it functions. And this is very true for construction, where there's a reliance on what's done in the past rather than looking forward to the future and innovating. So trying to convince a whole raft of different professions from, as you say, local authorities or fire inspectors in terms of building of timber, or insurance company or mortgage companies or M&E consultants, which are can be a little bit behind the times, to a whole plethora of different consultants out there. It is a real complex issue, but I think so long as you've got that very clear vision and passion to drive an issue forward, eventually you'll be heard. And I think that's what we've been finding at Perpendicular. So I just got off a call this morning with Oxford City Council, and they've just employed a sustainability consultant. So I haven't chatted to you, Aelene, about this one, but she's really eager to know more about how they can deliver hundreds of homes in Oxford sustainably and reducing carbon. So I was speaking to her about what to look out for, and I think she really appreciated that. So whether we might get work with her in the future, maybe not, but just pushing your message through and being proud of your message. Eventually, what we're finding is work does come.
And my final question is, how did you choose your name? I always like to hear this story, the name of your practice. How did that come about?
Depends who you ask. One of us might say we're still choosing our name.
Yes.
Pat, can I say Patrick?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Well, Patrick basically had wanted to call his practice years ago Perpendicular Architecture, and had bought the domain name. And we set up in a bit of a hurry, and we are still at Perpendicular Architecture.
We are. We've had some advice as well, and we had a big just before setting up. We said, okay, let's choose a name. So we came up with lots of alternative ideas, and not one quite grabbed on, I suppose, to replace Perpendicular. So I think Perpendicular was the kind of the background default, and I feel a little bit bad because Aelene didn't we didn't choose it together in that respect. And where it came from was, I think years ago, it was a conversation with some other AA students, I think at the time, about what a good name would be. So it came from that, but also it kind of reflected the geometric aspirations of design, coming from the AA and the experience of that with building, going up. So there was a whole raft of issues there. And it's actually, if you're kind of treating that in a way as how you evolve as a practice, almost it came from an idea which we've moved on from already. So, I think if we change our name in the future, that's great. I think, that there's no reason why we shouldn't. So it's a name at the time.
I mean, I do wonder whether Patrick just wanted to set up with someone who was, P for Patrick, A for
Aelene. Exactly.
But for that reason, that's probably why I agree. I'll settle too.
Thank you. And we have a question from the audience that just came in from Miguel. Really energizing presentation. I wonder how you balance your design time and other tasks at the practice.
Deep breath. That's a great question. Thank you for your compliment too. I have lots of theories. In theory, we would be very, very good at measuring our time. We are quite good at measuring our time, and we would expect for various different, part one, part two, director, various different percentages of how much design time we do versus how much administrative time. In reality, we're such a small practice still, and with a fluctuating workload in this climate, I'd say none of our theory applies directly. So it's there to aspire to sort of work out a good balance between the two, but it's tricky to manage, and it always is. I think what we are going to try and do is have sort of admin projects so that we can clearly monitor our tasks over those, rather than just trying to do a little bit of admin all the time. And collecting admin tasks together makes them more efficient. And then we can give as much time as possible to design. Yeah,
it's kind of pretty much divided between, roughly speaking anyway, I suppose it's about a third of my time designing, a third finding work and having conversations with others and meeting new clients and trying to get more work in. So, the number of projects we've looked at since September, I think we're on about 20 projects, and only a small handful, one or two, have actually progressed to a proper project. So, the vast majority, about 9 in 10, don't actually go anywhere. They stop for whatever reason. So a lot of time is spent trying to get new work in. And then, about a third is the admin side of it, I suppose, and trying to mix it up. But also, we're both respective parents as well. So let's say we both have 2 children too. So we're also at that point in life of having our own family, and that takes a huge amount of time as well, obviously.
We have another question coming in from Alejandro. Thanks for your presentation. Which was the most difficult obstacle you had to overcome when creating your own practice?
That's a great question. Wow. Aelene?
Well, I mean, really, honestly, I'm just going to speak from a kind of mum perspective. Like, the work comes when the work comes. You have kids that you need to get into childcare to free up your time to do the work. And just my obstacles were much more about just freeing up my time. Everything after that felt relatively easy. However, I think had we not been talking for such a long time, there would have been obstacles in how do we do this? What are your ideas? So I feel very grateful for the length of time that we had to discuss and flush out our ideas, so that when it came to starting up, when we had to start up quickly because we had a project there and a client waiting, we didn't have to repeatedly have all these discussions about what we wanted. We just went for it. And we literally, we set up a company one day, we got in touch with HMRC the next day, we were both directors a week later. we had to whiz through all the tick box exercises.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's actually that I think that is such a good question, because the idea of setting up a business and being directors, I mean, wow! But actually, it's incredibly easy. You can set up, you can register with Companies House within hours. I mean, it's incredibly easy. So that took me back quite a bit. Setting up a bank account is really quick, just a couple of days. So that part was actually much easier. I think the most difficult hurdle for me was confidence. And I remember, especially after so many years at dRMM Architects, sitting down with Sadie Morgan, one of the directors at dRMM, and just saying, that's it, I'm off, I'm leaving. I'm off to set up a business with Aelene, who Sadie knows really well as well. Who's delighted about. So I think that was probably the most difficult barrier I faced in setting up a company, is having the confidence to go and say, this is it, this is what I'm doing. And then announcing that to friends and family who have all got their own ideas about what they feel you should be doing. So yeah, I think that was the biggest hurdle, is just jumping into the deep end and going for it.
There actually was one practical hurdle, which I think if you were setting up today versus a year ago when we were, insurance and PI is a problem at the scale of building that we were trying to go in and get insurance for. And we've had more of a problem with it this year, in fact, than last year. I wouldn't let that put you off, but if you need to move quickly, it's definitely something you need to do your research on.
I have one last question, if I may. Talking from a student perspective, let's say ideal scenario, in a year's time, you want lots of projects and you need a part 1, part 2, part 3. What would be the elements in an application that will catch your attention?
Great. Well, I love looking at CVs, but what really captured our attention from both our employees, both Larry and James, was that they had incredibly strong CVs. Both their design work was outstanding, but they also had a really strong social angle on what they wanted their project to deliver. In some way, they had stripped back the aspirations of their project to, changing humanity for the better and getting rid of some ethical issues. And for me, I find that really compelling when they've driven thought very carefully about the social side of their project, not just the form or just the environmental considerations. For me, it has to have this social aspiration.
Yeah, no, I completely back Aelene up. I think, using Larry and James as an example is the fact that they came into the interview and they didn't just go through their projects, step by step. We did this and then this and then this and this. Instead, they came into the interview showing their really great work and actually started to tie it together, stitch it together with issues which are happening in the world today. So whether, Larry in particular was more about the inclusivity side of it, and James was more about sustainability. And both of those issues resonated with us enormously, because these were the issues which we have identified, we really feel are needing to be tackled in the world today. So really seeing that passion coming through from their portfolio and the way in which they explained it in their interview was very compelling. And it was very clear, actually, that we really wanted to employ them. Out of, we had quite a few. We advertised on the zine and we had quite a few CVs coming through. So that was really clear. That's
great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think it's we're meant to wrap up at 2 p.m. So thank you everyone for coming, and please join us for the next alumni session, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, Aelene and Patrick, for the wonderful presentation and Q&A session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.